So I'm out here at my tiny home, which I built about 2 years ago. And the intention of this build was to be able to live in it almost full-time year-round, which I actually have for the last 2 years. I was able to get this whole thing running with a power station and a few solar panels, and for the most part that took care of all of my electricity needs. Now, the way I wired this tiny home was in a way that it allowed me to plug into a power station, but also disconnect the power station and take it with me so that I could bring it to a job site if I was working remotely, take it to the cabin and use it for extra power there. But it really allowed me a lot of flexibility. Now, going forward with an upgrade, I'm looking at installing a full breaker panel, changing the wiring so that everything goes through a 30 amp circuit, and then tying in a 30 amp plug so I can plug the whole tiny home into a 30 amp service or a larger power station in its 30 amp plug. So it's a little bit more legit than what I have going on in there right now with just plugs on old extension cords tied into the main feed. Now, the Pecron F3000 has a 3600 watt inverter, which means that the 30 amp plug is a true 30 amps. It's not a 25 amp plug that looks like a 30 amp plug. It's a full 30 amp plug. So what I'm going to do is install a panel with a 30 amp service so that I can plug the whole tiny home directly into the 30 amp plug on the Pecron F3000, and that'll allow me to just plug and play very easily with that system.
So as you can see, these extension cords aren't the ideal scenario. They were intended to be a temporary setup, but they did the trick. They tied into the main power lines of the tiny home, and they got me up and running right from construction through a couple of years. So on the inside of the tiny home, you can see we've prioritized a nice big kitchen space. There's lots of prep room. And all of our electrical servicing actually comes in under the sink. So that's where we're going to be adding our extra panel. Now, this extra panel will allow us to tie in our 30 amp service and have all of our loads, both our lighting, our outlets, and our hot water tank, come into this one central space rather than be separated on different connections like I had before. Now, the original setup was intended to be temporary, so this will be a really nice upgrade now having this electrical panel go in here. Now, with space being fairly limited in the tiny home, we're going to be mounting the panel on the back wall there. That way it can still access all the breakers. Everything is very watertight under here. If it was a traditional home, obviously by code, you wouldn't want your electrical panel under the sink. But with this being a tiny home with some different circumstances, we will be tying our main loads panel there and connecting our main loads through the side of the panel. So our new main loads panel is just a sub panel that I picked up with a 30 amp main breaker in and a few 15 amp breakers to run our loads. The reason we're going with a small panel like this is so that we can have our main tied to the grid, still be at 30 amps, and then supply a few extra circuits around the tiny home. I started by removing the punch outs that I decided the wires would all go through. In this case, we're coming up through the deck of the trailer and then out the side into our existing loads connections. We're feeding our hot water tank wire through the bottom and the main grid connection through the bottom, and then the two connections out through the side of the box are going to supply our lights and the plugs throughout the tiny home. You can see I wired some shielded wire in for the hot water tank because that wire actually leaves through the bottom of the trailer. We connected our grounds and our neutral connections inside of the box. I pulled in the two main loads wires through the side of the conduit. Once I got them into place, I was able to start stripping those wires and preparing to connect them to the new 15 amp breakers. So once the wires were through, I started by mounting that up under the counter. Now that I'm out of the way, you can see that all of our lines are connected back to the main junction box in the wall, as well as our hot water tank and our main grid feed. So we've installed our panel under the sink here. What we have is our new line from the hot water tank coming in, our 30 amp wire heading out to our transfer switch, our two feeds heading out for our lights and our power in the tiny home. We've got these all tied into individual 15 amp breakers and then a 30 amp breaker on our main. We've got all of our neutrals tied in over here and all of our grounds tied in over here. So while I was inside wiring up the panel, I did have some help and a friend wired up the transfer switch on the outside of the tiny home. This is going to allow us to plug the tiny home directly into any generator, power station, or a grid tie that you may have, whether you move it to something like a trailer park or another residence where you want to tie into their grid power. But it's really nice because you can take these adapters, turn them into the 120 30 amp plug, and that ties directly into your power station.
Now we've got the main feed, 30 amp wire, all rain and watertight conduit, since this is all outside. That conduit continues right into our main breaker panel, which is under the sink. From there, we have distribution wire going out to our hot water tank, which is also shielded because that wire comes out of the tiny home across the trailer and back up to the hot water tank. And then our two main lines, which feed all of our electrical outlets and all of our lighting. And under the sink, we have our new breaker panel. So as you can see from the breaker panel, we have our 30 amp wire, that watertight conduit coming in from outside. We have our shielded wire going out to our hot water tank, and our two main lines heading right into the walls of the tiny home, and those power the plugs and the lighting.
Now that we've got our panel and transfer switch all wired up, we've got our power station plugged in, and you can see everything is now running through the main breaker panel. So as you can see now, we've got everything back up and running. My hot water is working. We've got all of our lights on. Everything works the same. The bathroom fan turns on great. As we come into the kitchen, we've got lots of lights on. The range hood fan works great. Our TV works, we've got our internet back up and running. Nighttime, you'd never know that we're off grid. We've got lots of power. We've always got our generator for backup if we need it. So far, this Pecron unit has been an awesome solution to power. I'm able to use the generator to charge it up if the sun isn't out enough and I need a little bit of extra power. But relying on solar has seemed to work for me, especially on a sunny day. I pull way more power off these panels than I ever use, so this Pecron unit has really kept me going nicely. For the last couple of years, power stations have been doing me great with the original setup with old 120 volt extension cords, but this new Pecron unit is really the way to go with a 30 amp plug on the front and a new breaker panel if you can afford that. So this Pecron F3000 has worked great for me. But if you need a power station to better fit your needs, check out the links in the description down below and find our power station quiz that'll help you with an instant recommendation to find a power station that is best for you. That's all we got for you guys now today. I can sleep a little better knowing that my tiny home isn't gonna burn down with my sketchy wiring. Otherwise, peace out and stay charged.